Good evening and welcome to tonight's Yukon City Council Municipal Authority work session. It's May the 2nd. Wow, we're echoey in here. I like that. It's May 2nd, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. We're in the council chambers, which is the Centennial Building here at 12 South 5th Street in the amazing city of Yukon, Oklahoma. Tonight, we are going to discuss the presentation given by Mitchell Hort about the code revisions. Mitchell?
Actually, tonight the presentation will be given by Mark Zitzow. This is the last Mark Zitzow with Johnson Associates. He's the city planner as well. This is a project we've been working on for quite a while, almost 2 years. This is the last piece before it comes in ordinance form, but Mark is here tonight to talk through the what we've been working on again. This is, like I said, we brought it multiple times, and this is the last time we're bringing it to you for your review comments.
Thank you.
Good evening. Glad to be back. Mark Zitzow with Johnson & Associates. Address is 1 East Sheridan Avenue for the record. We have a presentation up that we gave you back in February. It's the same. I think we're just going to hit on a few key points. We recently went to Planning Commission. Planning Commission recommended adoption of this. They had a couple changes. One of them related to the accessory dwelling units. They sought to strike that from the code, and so I think that will be coming before you for your final vote. But I think there were maybe questions. We just wanted to recap kind of where we've been, how we got here, and then answer any specific questions you have about items that are within the code. There we go. So as Mitchell stated, we've been working on this now for, I think we're coming up on 2 years. We adopted the new comprehensive plan in 2020, and since then we've been really workshopping and working with staff on the direction we wanted to take with the new code to bring the zoning code into conformance with the comprehensive plan. And so outreach, we've been before Planning Commission several times in work sessions. We've been before City Council, the Board of Adjustment, engineers and developers. There are a lot of pieces of this code that involve the subdivision regulations that are highly technical and require input from that community. We also went before the sign community, folks that do billboards, entry signs on subdivisions. Not much of the sign code was touched, but that community was just sensitive to any potential changes, so we met with them. And then we did research on fees to make sure your fees were in line with other municipalities and the amount of staff time it takes to review an application that comes before you. Our goal was to be here in February and March, but we had a lot of feedback and went through a lot of iterations, so we're a little bit behind.
That February, March 2022, it says?
That was the initial one. That was the hope.
Okay.
But we started a little bit later. I think through COVID, there were some delays early on. So this is our outreach. We kind of just went through this, but I think it shows we've been engaged with kind of key stakeholders and groups that are users of the code. These are the fees. I'll just reiterate one thing that came up. There was a desire to have increased architectural regulations on single-family homes, more brick, masonry materials. There was the state of Oklahoma passed a bill that said that communities cannot dictate design requirements on single-family homes. And so what we did, though, was in our reading of it, it specifically said new single-family. So in this code, we actually have higher design standards for duplexes and multifamily that we were allowed to implement in the code. So overall, we did increase architectural standards throughout the community. So this is just kind of breaking down all the sections of the code, and I won't go back through that. We talked kind of at length about new zoning districts, where the old ones are being migrated to in the new code. We've created 2 new overlays, one around I-40 and one around the urban core. These are how those uses got collapsed. We're being a little bit more general on uses, not so granular. Part of this is, like we talked about, I don't think 5 years ago anyone thought that there'd be axe-throwing businesses, right? And so how does that work into a code? Conditional uses, we've added conditions. We have more special permit uses, accessory uses. Here are those special permits. A special permit is essentially the full zoning process that you see at all of your meetings, full public hearings. Article 4 is all of the bulk standards, setbacks, building heights, lot coverages, lot minimums. The map on the screen, through the zoning map that we're asking you to approve, we're cleaning up some existing non-conforming uses, but one of the biggest changes that you'll see is all those areas in blue are zoned R2 two-family. We're seeking to rezone all of those to R1 single-family. At the time, they were sought for higher lot coverages, but they're all developed as single-family neighborhoods. So we're seeking just to bring those into conformance with what's on the ground. This is the urban core overlay. This matches the area that we designated in the comprehensive plan. The goal there is to promote infill development, some increased density, and kind of continued revitalization of Main Street. I-40, we have increased height allowances, but through the code, we did include increased buffers adjacent to the residential. A lot of this land was zoned for C5, which is the most intense commercial district that Yukon currently has on the books. And we recognize there could potentially be some site plan issues when adjacent to the residential. So we sought to mitigate some of those. They had some increased signage allowances, and they do have increased landscaping standards. There was a slide missing, unless I went through it. But I'm gonna kind of linger and hit on the short-term rental, because I know there have been a lot of questions about that. What came to our attention through this process was that there were existing short-term rentals that maybe were or are existing without approval, because the Yukon code is absent of that use unit, and so therefore it's operating illegally. There were issues in terms of enforcement and what the city could legally do, given that there's nothing in the ordinances today that speak to penalties or moving forward with legal action. So in this, what we have done is created a process for someone to seek approval of a short-term rental through a special permit application. Aside from that, though, what we heard was there were still concerns about the potential that one could be permitted and what the noticing looked like. So in a typical rezoning application or a special use permit, someone files the application, they give you the details required in the code, and they have to provide a 300-foot ownership list. So everyone within 300 feet would be notified that this application was sought. For short-term rentals, we've doubled the radius requirement for short-term rentals to 600 feet. They would have to obtain and maintain a city-issued short-term rental license. They'd be required to post the information to renters and guests that include the license registration, the operator's name and phone number, the property manager's name and phone number, location of any on-site and off-site parking spaces available for the guest. They would have to determine occupancy limits at the time of the application. They'd have to provide a floor plan that note fire escapes and fire exits. And they'd also have to include information on relevant burn bans, water restrictions, and trash collection rules and dates for any guests. The use of a short-term rental for any commercial or social event is prohibited. So there was concern about this could be used for bachelor parties or bachelorette parties. The code specifically says that would not be permitted. A license or guest for a short-term rental shall not violate any of the parking ordinances, noise ordinances, or any other ordinances. So in addition to what we believe to be the most restrictive requirements to even seek a short-term rental license, we also then updated another section of your code for fines and penalties. And is that in this book? So within that, we have both penalties for folks operating illegally without a license. Then we have fines for those who have sought a license and maybe had been approved a license, different fines. And so those are daily fines that go upwards of $600 per day. After the third violation, the city would be able to seek legal action if someone is continuing to operate. And I think that is maybe one of the most important pieces. What we've done is put steps in place for someone who wants to properly obtain one and run one correctly, the option. But you have clawback provisions yearly that they have to come back and seek approval. If during an approval process they were either fined, neighbors were calling it in, you can revoke that license at any point. But if you have someone who's operating illegally, you can go through the step of fines, and then you can take legal action to shut them down permanently. The fines we believe to be cost prohibitive to run an Airbnb. I think numbers have been thrown out that some were operating at $200 to $500 a day. Those fines go up to $600 per day. So it's not feasible for someone to be charging $500 a day and being fined $600 a day. So we think that kind of would nip that portion in the bud. But I think the other important part is no one would be allowed to operate an Airbnb or short-term rental without Planning Commission and this body's approval. So by adopting this code, it doesn't automatically allow any to operate. Anyone who seeks approval would have to file this application, go through all of those requirements, and then ultimately your vote would have to be a yes for them to operate. So that's the short-term rental. The other item that was discussed at Planning Commission were accessory dwelling units. Through the comprehensive plan, we believe that that was one of the goals and topics, was to increase housing in the core. And then through our conversations with staff and our review of previous staff reports, the most common accessory dwelling unit that was sought was in agricultural areas. You have people seeking to age in place or family members moving back home, and they wanted a separate structure for that. So what the code sought to do was allow those in the downtown overlay, the urban core overlay, and in agricultural areas that had minimum lot sizes. The Planning Commission is bringing this to you with a recommendation to strike the allowed accessory dwelling unit that would only then be sought by a PUD or an SPUD. So I think the benefit there is it doesn't remove the opportunity for someone to seek it. The code will still provide for it, but ultimately it leaves it more up to the discretion of Planning Commission and City Council for final approval. So with that, I'm happy to dig into any particular section of the code, but I think I'd open it up to you all for specific questions you might have.
Any questions? Did it address the outdoor food pantries?
Sorry?
Did the Planning Commission address the outdoor food pantries?
They did. There were discussions on that. And so that was actually, there was a lot of discussion through this process about what that looked like. There's federal regulation as well as state legislation that dictates what municipalities are allowed to do when it comes to regulating church and church uses and a church's mission. There are constitutional issues. And so what we believed we had done was put in appropriate parameters that came to where it can be placed and the size that it can be placed. Based on our review and our research, we felt that that was the appropriate way to seek to regulate that. At the end of the day, we believe that a church has a mission, whatever that mission may be, and through that it is, whether it's to provide services for the needy, you get into a tricky situation of over-regulating and preventing that mission from occurring. So what we believe we've done is put forth a code that is legally defensible. And I think through that meeting, I don't want to speak for the city attorney, but I think he said similar. So it was addressed. It's only allowed in conjunction with a church. Random residents in random neighborhoods cannot put up food pantries and encourage people to come to their private residence and do that. So that is currently in the code. It'd be up to you all if you seek to keep it in there or strike it.
Any other questions? Okay, no other questions? All right, well, thank you for coming. I know that there are people that are here that are going to want to speak, but that will be during the council meeting, not during this time. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned until 7 o'clock when our regular council meeting will start.